A stray dog walked straight through the Vatican gates, silent, alone, and without a collar. He passed the guards, crossed the courtyard, and laid something at the feet of the new Pope Leo that left everyone frozen. At first, no one understood what it meant, until one old man was brought back, and what they uncovered changed everything. So what really happened behind the Vatican walls that day? First, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The cobblestones were still damp from the morning rain when the new pope stepped into the courtyard alone. It was just past the Angelus hour, and the gardens had emptied. The fountains gurgled softly. Somewhere beyond the colonnades, a bell rang, low, patient. He walked with his hands folded behind his back, moving slowly beneath the marble arch, the edge of his white cassock whispering along the stone. A man who had just become the most visible figure in the world, and yet, in that moment, he was entirely unseen. The guards kept their distance. They had learned quickly that Leo XIV, still barely 2 weeks into his papacy, preferred silence to ceremony. He greeted each of them with a nod, never more than a word or two, but when he came to pray or walk, they knew to leave him be. Then the dog appeared. It stepped out from behind one of the trimmed hedges near the olive trees, not trotting, not sniffing, just appearing, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. Its coat was thick, black and tan, with dirt matted along the legs. Its left ear had a split. There was no collar. At first, the guards didn't react. It wasn't uncommon to see stray animals wander near the Vatican walls. Cats mostly, pigeons, sometimes a dog from the nearby apartments. But this one didn't wander. It walked with unsettling precision straight across the open courtyard, past 2 startled guards, past a bishop in the corridor, right up to the Pope. Leo XIV didn't flinch. He stopped where he was and simply watched as the dog approached. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edge of his sleeve. The dog came within a meter of him, then lowered its head. From its mouth it dropped a crumpled strip of leather. The Pope knelt. The guards tensed, unsure whether to intervene. But the Pope raised one hand slightly, just enough to keep them at bay. He picked up the leather. It was old, cracked. At one end hung a rusted clasp. At the other, barely visible beneath years of wear, was an insignia. Faded, nearly rubbed away, but unmistakable. The seal of the Vatican Security Corps. The dog sat. It didn't bark, didn't whimper, just looked at the Pope with calm, unblinking eyes. Leo turned the collar over in his hand as though weighing it for meaning. And then he did something strange. He smiled, not broadly, not with amusement, but with the soft recognition of a man who had just been spoken to without a word. He looked up at the guards. "Let him be," he said quietly. "He's home." Carlo Moretti hadn't set foot inside the Vatican in nearly a decade. His uniform had long since been packed away, folded neatly in a cedar trunk beside his medals. He never intended to return, not out of bitterness, but because some places, once left, should stay in the past. But when the call came from the Vatican secretary, he knew what it meant before the man finished speaking. "There's a dog," the secretary had said. "No tag, no chip. He walked up to the Holy Father 2 nights ago and dropped a collar." Carlo had already stood up from his chair. "Describe it." The man on the line hesitated. "Old. Brown leather, frayed, with a faded insignia." Carlo's hand closed around the phone. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Left clasp broken?" Silence. "Yes." That was all he needed. Years ago, when he was younger, quicker on his feet, and with less silver in his beard, Carlo had been one of the Vatican's discreet secrets, handler of a quiet, tight-knit canine unit. Few people knew the Vatican even employed such dogs. They weren't for show. They were never part of processions or pageantry. These were scent-trained patrol and inspection dogs used behind the scenes, especially before high-security events, visiting dignitaries, or late-night transport convoys. And Lupo had been his finest, a German shepherd with sharp eyes and a spine of stone, but the gentlest mouth Carlo had ever seen. The dog could scale a barricade without effort, sniff out a concealed hinge on an altar base, and curl at Carlo's feet with the devotion of a lamb. He wasn't just trained, he was in tune. Their partnership hadn't started that way. When Carlo first met Lupo, the dog was a half-wild rescue from a monastery in the mountains, where the brothers had found him abandoned as a pup. The shepherd monks had fed him, but never quite tamed him. He watched everyone from a distance, ears alert, body tense like a coiled spring. "He won't work for you," the kennel master had warned. "Too independent, never takes treats from handlers, doesn't respond to the usual incentives." Carlo had simply nodded, sat on the ground, and waited. For 3 hours, he didn't move, didn't offer food, didn't call out, just sat with an open palm resting on his knee. As twilight fell, the impossible happened. Lupo approached, circled once, then pressed his muzzle into Carlo's hand. "He doesn't need incentives," Carlo had told the astonished kennel master. "He needs purpose." From that day forward, they developed a language deeper than commands. Their training sessions became almost mystical, Lupo anticipating directions before Carlo gave them, finding targets that hadn't been planted, working with a focus that made senior officers pause in the hallways to watch. Then came the storm. A security drill had taken them to the woodland edge just beyond the Vatican walls, near the narrow forested patch that bordered private property. It was meant to be a quick scent trail exercise, but lightning struck somewhere close, and in the chaos, Lupo vanished. They searched all night, days, then weeks. Carlo filed the paperwork, presumed dead in field training. But the truth never settled. There'd been no sign of injury, no body, just the broken collar, found alone, half buried near the edge of a stone retaining wall in the forest, as if he had slipped it off, or been told to leave it behind. Some of the guards joked afterward that Lupo had gone wild, couldn't take the training anymore. Others suggested he'd been stolen, but Carlo knew different. "He saw something," he said quietly to himself more than once, "and he followed it." They archived the file under operational loss. They boxed his vest. Carlo retired the following year. But he never stopped watching the tree line, never threw out the whistle, and every so often, on quiet nights, he'd swear he heard paws across the gravel behind his old villa, always just far enough away to be imagined, always gone by the time he opened the door. When he returned to the Vatican now, stepping into the cool, echoing halls once more, a young Swiss guard passed him without a second glance. Carlo still moved like he belonged. As he was guided toward the inner courtyard, the secretary muttered, "I thought the collar was fake at first. Something someone made to get close." Carlo didn't answer. He already knew. He had buried that collar himself. They hadn't expected Leo XIV to be like this. When the conclave white smoke rose and his name was announced, few knew what to make of him. A former archbishop from a coastal diocese, known more for walking to parish funerals than giving speeches. No politics, no entourage. His first address was shorter than expected. His second was about washing feet. In the days that followed, the city around the Vatican buzzed with speculation. But within the walls, the tone shifted in quieter ways. Staff noticed he preferred to carry his own folder. The nuns who ran the kitchen said he insisted on eating at the staff table. The Swiss guards whispered that he thanked each of them by name, and meant it. He had eyes, like winter light, clear, pale, and never in a hurry. There were stories about Leo before he became pope, whispers among the clergy that followed him to Rome. How he'd spent his early priesthood in a rural parish where the church doors stayed open even during the heaviest snowfalls. How he'd walked 5 kilometers through a storm to bring last rites to a dying farmer, only to find the man's 3 dogs keeping silent vigil around the bed. When the farmer passed, the dogs allowed no one near except the young priest, who sat with them until dawn. "Animals know the truth about us before we speak," he once said in a sermon most had forgotten. "They hear the voice beneath the voice." Perhaps that's why when the stray dog appeared in the Vatican gardens, Leo XIV was the only one who didn't seem surprised. So when the dog returned the next evening, walking again with that strange, deliberate silence, no one was surprised that the Pope was already waiting. He stood near the edge of the garden wall beside the small fig tree that leaned just slightly south. The setting sun cast long shadows through the iron gate, and the gravel crunched softly under paw. This time the dog didn't drop anything. He simply walked up and sat beside the Pope. Leo XIV looked down at him. "You came back," he said, not loudly. The dog blinked. One of the gardeners, watching from a nearby tool shed, swore he saw the Pope smile again, this time a little more freely. He reached down and gently brushed a leaf from the dog's back. The animal didn't flinch. The guards didn't move either. By now, they had orders. Let the dog pass. Let him stay. That night, the Pope walked through the gardens again after a complaint. No aides, no torchbearers. The dog followed exactly one pace behind, always to the right, head low, ears soft. They circled the rose garden. The Pope paused near the statue of St. Joseph and stayed there, in silence for nearly half an hour. The dog sat beside him, unmoving. This became a routine. For 3 nights, the pattern repeated. The dog appeared. The Pope walked. They didn't speak. One couldn't, the other didn't need to. It was the kind of companionship forged in grief or faith or both. By the 4th evening, a fresh bowl of water was set beside the gardener's shed before sundown. By the 5th, a thin blanket was quietly laid out beneath the fig tree. No one asked who did it. The Vatican has many hands and very few questions. When the Pope spoke of the dog, it was only once, and only to the Secretary of State. "He doesn't bark," he said. "No, Your Holiness," the secretary replied cautiously. "That is unusual." "It's not that he's mute," Leo said. "He's listening for something else." The secretary didn't respond. Leo looked toward the garden through the window. Or someone. The meeting was arranged without ceremony. No press, no record, just a note hand-delivered to Carlo Moretti's guest room by a steward in plain robes. "His Holiness will receive you in the Clementine Hall tonight after Vespers." Carlo hadn't expected the Pope himself to call him in. He figured some undersecretary would want a debrief, maybe ask him to identify the caller for documentation, but as he entered the tall, marble-flanked corridor and the heavy doors opened, there he was, Pope Leo XIV, standing alone by a narrow, arched window. "Carlo Moretti," the Pope said, turning to face him with that same composed gaze. "You were Lupo's handler." Carlo's heart paused. He didn't expect to hear the name from the Pope's mouth. "Yes, Holy Father," he said, lowering his head. The Pope studied him quietly. "You buried the caller?" "I did. In the woods, near the wall," Carlo said. "He was gone. It was all I found." "I believe you," Leo replied. Then he stepped aside. "Come." He led Carlo down a narrower passage, one of those private corridors the public never sees. As they turned the final corner toward the outer courtyard, the Pope slowed. The dog was already there, waiting, seated on the path beside the fig tree. The moment he saw Carlo, he rose. Carlo stopped walking. The dog took 3 slow steps forward, eyes locked on him, ears slightly back, not in fear, but in recognition. Then, without a sound, he pressed his head gently against Carlo's knee. It was Lupo. Carlo knelt, his breath catching somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. He didn't speak. He just ran a hand down the dog's spine, pausing when he felt the old scar near the shoulder, the one from a bramble during training drills, still there. "I don't understand," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "I buried that collar. I watched the earth take it." The Pope was silent for a while, then he said, "There are some acts of obedience we don't fully see until they return to us." Carlo looked up. "He shouldn't be alive." "He is." Carlo nodded slowly, blinking the wetness from his eyes. They sat together in that small courtyard until the bells rang out again. Leo didn't speak much after that. He simply asked Carlo to stay. "He's brought something back to us," the Pope said, "but I don't yet know what." Later that night, the dog refused to enter the guest chambers where bedding had been prepared. He stayed instead by the courtyard gate, watching the shadowed corridor beyond. Waiting, the night Lupo disappeared, The air had been thick with static, the kind that raised the hair on your arms before the thunder ever came. Carlo remembered it clearly. He'd checked his watch 3 times during the drill. He'd felt something off, even before the first bolt struck. They had taken the dogs beyond the Vatican gardens into the sloped woodland path bordering the old wall. It was a routine perimeter scenting, a chance for the dogs to track mock intruders hidden along the forest fringe. Simple, controlled, uneventful, until the sky cracked open. Lightning struck a tree barely 50 meters from their line. The dogs panicked. One bolted, another twisted free of its collar and ran in the opposite direction. Handlers called out, blew whistles, regrouped. Lupo didn't come back. At first, Carlo thought he had doubled back or gone to ground nearby. He wasn't the kind to run wild, but minutes turned to hours. They searched through mud and broken branches. Then dawn came, and the only thing they found was the torn leather collar beside a moss-covered wallstone. Carlo remembered standing in that exact spot, the cold seeping through his soaked uniform. His flashlight had caught something unusual, marks on the stone near where the collar lay. 3 precise scratches, too even to be natural. It looked like some kind of signal, but to whom or for what purpose he couldn't say. "Lupo!" he had called until his voice grew hoarse, the rain washing away any scent trails that might have led them to the dog. Other handlers had eventually given up, clapping his shoulder with sympathetic murmurs about these things happening sometimes. But Carlo had returned night after night, using his security clearance to access the perimeter. He'd bring Lupo's favorite training toy, a piece of rope woven with bells that made a distinctive chime. He'd ring it in the darkness, waiting, listening for the familiar patting of paws that never came. That should have been the end, but even then Carlo felt something gnawing inside him. The way the collar was laid, not flung, not dragged, but placed, as if Lupo had set it down himself before continuing on. In the months that followed, Carlo requested additional searches, quietly, off the books. He walked the perimeter at night, once even bribed a municipal groundskeeper to let him inside the sealed utility tunnels just outside the Vatican wall. But there were no prints, no carcass, no sign of struggle. Lupo had simply vanished. Now, with the dog standing beside him again, head held high, eyes sharp, even under the weight of years, Carlo knew he hadn't run away. He had followed something. The Pope asked him gently over supper in the cloistered dining room, "Do you believe he was chasing someone?" "I think," Carlo answered slowly, "he sensed something we didn't." Leo looked thoughtful. "An intruder?" Carlo shook his head. "Not necessarily. Maybe not even a person. A change, a presence. Dogs like him, trained at that level, they don't act on whim. He wasn't scared. He was tracking." Leo leaned back. "And what would make him come back now?" Carlo looked at the Pope. Whatever he followed, ended, or called him back. That night, Leo brought out the Vatican security logs from the archives. He had them sent from the old guard tower, those few handwritten notebooks no one bothered with anymore, since the digital system took over. Dust coated the leather spines. The ink had faded in places, but on one page dated the night of Lupo's disappearance, a faint line stood out. "Unregistered footfall near old corridor entrance. Patrol altered. Nothing found." That entrance had been sealed years earlier, part of a renovation that was never finished. No cameras faced it, no real concern at the time, but the time matched. The location aligned with the forest's edge. He was going toward it, Carlo said, not away. Leo looked down at the dog resting near the fireplace, half asleep, but with one eye still open. "He wasn't running, the Pope said. He was responding." Carlo nodded. And now, for the first time in over a decade, the Vatican's quietest dog had returned. Not for food, not for shelter, but because something was unresolved. Something only he remembered. The dog was waiting again the next night. He sat by the gate, head turned slightly towards the old basilica, unmoving. As the bells for Compline faded into silence, The Pope stepped out into the cool air. This time, not alone. Carlo walked at his side. Neither of them spoke. The dog rose, gave a single glance toward them, then turned and began walking. Not toward the gardens or the courtyard, but deeper into the interior grounds. Through a side path few remembered, Leo followed without hesitation, past the old laundry arch, past the tool shed, once used by the groundsman, toward a stone stairwell that led beneath the private chapel, an area now used mostly for storage. Carlo hesitated. I haven't been down here since they sealed off the lower vestry. The Pope gave a quiet nod. Neither have I. The dog reached the bottom step and paused at the far wall. The stone was discolored in one place. As they watched, he sniffed once, then scratched lightly with a paw. Not frantic, not aggressive, just deliberate. Carlo stepped forward and ran his hand along the stones. One near the floor shifted under his palm. With a soft groan, the tile lifted, revealing a shallow space beneath it. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth and a rusted key. Carlo unwrapped it carefully. I've seen this before, he said. That chest in the sacristy, the one they locked up when Monsignor Della Torre passed. No one had the combination. Leo's brow furrowed. And now we do. They returned to the sacristy, where the chest sat forgotten behind a carved wooden screen. Carlo inserted the key. The lock resisted for a second, then gave with a tired metallic click. Inside were the old patrol logs, maintenance records, and sealed notes once reviewed by the internal security staff. Nothing explosive, nothing scandalous. But in one of the logs, dated the night of Lupo's disappearance, a detail leapt out. Patrol resumed after unidentified movement near Corridor 3B, no subjects found. Key access panel left unsecured, secured manually. That corridor hadn't existed on any modern maps. Leo traced the ink with his finger. Someone came in, or went out. He knew it. He followed. Beneath the logbook lay a yellowed envelope, its seal broken but contents still inside. Carlo removed several photographs, black and white surveillance images from the perimeter cameras. Most showed nothing of interest. Empty pathways, a gardener with a wheelbarrow, a delivery truck at the service entrance. But one image made Carlo's breath catch. There, at the edge of the frame, barely visible in the twilight exposure, a figure moving along the outer wall. The timestamp matched the night of the storm, 22:17. Just minutes before the lightning struck. The figure wore what appeared to be maintenance coveralls, but carried something long and thin that didn't match any standard equipment. And behind the figure, alert and focused, was the unmistakable silhouette of a German shepherd. My God, Carlo whispered, tilting the photo toward the light. He wasn't running from us. He was tracking someone. The Pope studied the image carefully. Why was this buried? Who would hide such evidence? Carlo flipped through more papers until he found a memo marked internal only and signed by a cardinal who had passed away years earlier. The language was bureaucratic, circumspect, but one line stood out. Matter resolved discreetly. No escalation required. Security protocols adjusted to prevent further incidents. Carlo sat on the bench, quiet. And they buried it. Not out of malice. Probably just because no one wanted a hassle. No injuries, no stolen relics, no political mess. So it never mattered, Leo said. Carlo looked toward the dog, who now sat calmly by the door, tail thumping once against the stone. To everyone else, Carlo replied. No, but not to him. There was no press release, no mass in honor of what they'd found, no bulletin read aloud during Sunday liturgy. What the Pope uncovered with the dog and Carlo remained exactly where it belonged, quiet, understood only by a few, and never spoken of in full. But changes took root in subtle ways. The fig tree near the courtyard now had a shallow ceramic dish at its base, refreshed each morning with clean water. A guard was discreetly assigned to patrol that path during late evenings, not because of a threat, but because the Pope had requested no disturbance during his walks. Lupo, though no one had officially named him, had become a fixture. He didn't live in the guest kennels. He didn't need a leash. No one trained him to stay, yet he never left. Each morning, before first light, he would rise from his place beneath the tree and walk with the Pope around the edge of the gardens. They moved as one. No fanfare. No barking, just the shuffle of footsteps and the soft click of claws on stone. Only once did the Pope ever mention him directly during his homily. He was speaking of obedience, not the kind that bends under orders, but the kind that listens deeper. True obedience, Leo said gently, is when a soul follows the sound no one else can hear and keeps walking, even when no one follows. Those who had seen the dog appear beside him understood. A few days later, in the side chapel near the sacristy, a small reliquary was placed near the altar. It was modest, no inscription, just a thin golden case with a votive candle burning beside it. Inside, rested upon dark velvet, was the shredded leather collar, cleaned but left exactly as it had been found. Carlo stood in front of it for a long time before speaking. He earned this more than most men I've served beside. The Pope, standing beside him, nodded. He didn't come back for praise. No, Carlo replied, but I think he needed to know someone would finally see it. And in that, he had. The Pope had Lupo, fitted with a new collar, not ceremonial, not adorned, just a clean band of leather, soft and simple, with no tags, only a small mark burned into the underside. Honor by instinct. A week later, Carlo prepared to leave. He had refused the offer of a formal post. I've done my part, he said. He doesn't need me watching him anymore. He's already where he belongs. Before he departed, he knelt beside Lupo one last time. The dog pressed his head gently into Carlo's chest just once. No leash, no command, Carlo whispered, still doing better than half the humans I trained. The dog gave a soft chuff like he'd understood. That evening, before Carlo left for his villa in the countryside, the Pope invited him for a private supper in the small study adjacent to his quarters. Over simple fare, bread, cheese, a modest wine, Leo shared what he'd discovered about Lupo's years of absence. The groundskeeper at the Eastern monastery remembers him, the Pope said. A shepherd who appeared during a winter storm about 9 years ago. He never stayed inside, but would come for food each morning, then disappear along the hillside paths. The monks called him Il Guardiano, the guardian, because he would appear whenever strangers approached, watching from a distance until they left. Carlo smiled at this. Always on patrol. There's more, Leo continued, refilling their glasses. 3 years ago, a thief broke into the monastery's small museum. Nothing of great value there, just local artifacts, historical items. The only security was an elderly brother who couldn't have defended himself. Lupo intervened? The Pope nodded. The brother said a shadow detached itself from the darkness. No barking, no growling, just silent, efficient movement. The thief fled with nothing but scratches on his legs and a story no one believed. Carlo felt his throat tighten. He found another post, another place to watch. And when the time was right, the Pope finished, he returned to the first. Carlo understood then why Lupo had come back. Not just to deliver a message, but because somehow, through instinct or providence, he knew that the new Pope would listen where others hadn't. And that night, as the Pope walked alone under the early stars, the dog at his side, not a single guard stirred. No one raised a brow. It was as if he had always been there. The garden was silvered with dew when the Pope stepped outside, his breath faint in the cool morning air. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, but the sky had begun to glow, soft blues pushing back the night. Lupo stood waiting, already awake, already alert. They didn't speak. They never had to. Together they moved through the gravel path, the dog always one pace behind, flanking the Pope's right side, past the rose beds, past the chapel, past the place where the old fig tree dropped its first leaves of the season. This walk was slower than usual. The Pope paused often, once to touch a crumbling brick in the wall, once to watch a bird rustle from the olive branches. Lupo stayed with him, matching every pause with patient stillness. When they reached the far end of the garden, the place where the path narrowed into a tight loop near the ironwork gate, Leo stopped. Lupo sat beside him, lowering himself carefully now. His legs didn't move with the same energy they once did. The limp, which had seemed to vanish after the first week, had returned, faint, but there. The Pope knelt slowly. He looked at the dog and reached down, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "You did what no man could," he said quietly. "You kept watch." The dog blinked, as if taking in the weight of that sentence. Then he lowered his head, right against the white hem of the Pope's robe. They stayed like that for a long time, even as the first shaft of sunlight crept over the eastern wall. There were no cameras, no onlookers, only the man, the dog, and the silence between them that said everything. What do you think made the dog come back that day? And if he hadn't dropped that collar, would anyone have ever known? If this story moved you, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Share this video with someone who still believes loyalty has no language. Watch the other stories now on your screen, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with something brand new.